Welcome everyone to Enjoy the Journey podcast with Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, CEO and co-founder of Aureus Financial.
Sam Panetta, COO and co-founder of Aureus Financial.
And we're here with Chris Ridd, the CEO of MyProsperity.
Yes, thank you, and thanks for having us, guys.
Thanks for coming out, Chris.
Mate, so we've been a pretty loyal user of MyProsperity for a while. As a bit of background for the average punter out there who doesn't know what MyProsperity is, do you want to give us a bit of a crash course, mate?
Yeah, sure. So what we do, we build a platform for advisors, for their clients to get all of their wealth, all of their financial world into one place. And this is a big shift because if you think about financial advice over the years, it's often been about investing in something, or it's been quite product specific. What we've learned over the journey is that people just want one place where everything lives. And I know myself, so I came as a customer. That's how I got involved in MyProsperity. And I've said this quite often. My advisor got me onto the platform. It was the first time in 26 years in my career that I actually sat back and went, oh my God, I actually feel in control of my finances. So it is about, and a lot of people have stuff everywhere. And it doesn't matter if you're a basic, wealth requirements or you've got a sophisticated structures and so forth. You talk to anyone, most people have stuff everywhere. So they might have a strategy to grow wealth, but they've still got stuff everywhere. We solve that problem. And of course, we're all about the advisor. So having all the data in place presents amazing opportunities for the advisor then to be able to get access to that and understand where their clients are at and help them on that journey. So that's what we do.
Which is fantastic. I think the most significant part of working with I guess, the software with our clients is that before we were doing everything manually. And I think that for most clients, you're right, that they've got stuff everywhere. They've got a couple of super funds, hopefully consolidated all into one. They've got some insurance, they've got investment accounts, they've got properties, loans, bank accounts, everything's everywhere.
Yes.
And the common theme was that there's a really lack of certainty, which I guess creates stress. It's just that thing hanging over you that you're not 100% sure whether you're on track is a big gap in the market that the software's solved.
Yes.
So I guess, mate, you've obviously been in the industry for a while. So prior to MyProsperity, what were you doing?
Because my career has always been in tech from the very outset, from the late 80s.
Yeah, wow.
So I know. So I say that people also born then. So I started in tech at the time when the PC was very new, 89, and I worked for a large US kind of multinational. In 1995, I joined Microsoft, and I was there for 15 years, and so that was a really exciting journey. Microsoft at the time, I joined a month after they just launched Windows 95, if you remember that operating system.
Yeah.
And what an amazing journey that was. The 90s was when tech was going crazy. Microsoft was actually a big disruptor of mid-range Unix and other mainframe platforms. So I sort of went through that whole tech wave right through the tech boom and the tech wreck. And I remained at Microsoft till 2010, and then I got really over the whole corporate scene and left. And then I had a couple of options to consider, but I ended up joining Xero as managing director when Xero was very small, 6 staff in Australia in 2010. And so that was a crazy journey because I was looking at going accounting software, I'm not really sure, but I'll give this a crack. And I mean, Xero's been an amazing story. I was there for 5 years as managing director for Australia and took that from 6 staff to about 270. And wow. At the time we had about 3,500 customers, and by the time I left, we were pretty close to about 300,000. So it was an amazing journey, and it just showed me the power of cloud computing and the fact that if you've got something really valuable, particularly small business was struggling with accounting software. So that was interesting. And then I left Xero really just to get involved in a number of different tech startups to sort of jump out of that. And I'm really excited by the tech scene in Australia and in particular in Melbourne, where when I started at Xero there wasn't really much going on, and now there's just so much good technology coming out of.
It's a bit of a tech hub now, isn't it?
Look, not just Melbourne, but Australia in general. I'd love, I'm really passionate about the fact that, we're building really world-class technology here. Mm. And I think MyProsperity is a great example of that, which is, I started as a customer, I got involved as an advisor and ended up, becoming CEO. And really passionate about what we're doing and, just excited generally about great tech that's coming out of Australia.
Why do you think because you went from Xero and then now you're in MyProsperity, they're both, financial based companies. You're a tech guy, right? So you're a tech guy operating technology companies in the finance space. Why do you think technology and finance link up so well?
Well, look, there's a big need, and when I started at Xero, there was clearly small businesses were struggling with the current propositions, which was desktop software. There was a lot of friction involved in dealing with the accountant. Putting everything in one place in the cloud meant that the advisor, the accountant, and the small business owner had the same visibility on the numbers, and that the advisor could collaborate. That they felt in control. All of those themes lend themselves to MyProsperity, because what I saw when I left Xero was that, by and large, when I sit here today and look at small business accounting software, cloud-based accounting software with small business, the penetration is huge. Xero's got, they're approaching 600,000 small businesses on their platform now in Australia. It's crazy. And you've got QuickBooks and you've got MYB and others that are now, there's really good options and technology coming into that space. Fantastic for small business. You look at individuals, households with their personal finance. We know, for example, there's only 14-15% of working Australian adults have financial planners or advisors, and the technology options are really limited. I have to think that one day we'll all want to be able to get on your phone and see where your finances are at. Yeah. And today, that just doesn't happen. And like I said before, everything's in a mess. So I think technology can solve that problem and do it really in an elegant way. And that's what we've built, which is, the ability to have all of everything that you own and owe in one place. Budgeting, wills, insurance, everything there at your fingertips. It has to be what we're going to see happen in the future, and that's why I got involved.
It's come such a long way. Like I worked as a consultant for Reckon at the beginning of my career, and I remember back in the day they had the Quicken personal cash flow software, which was a desktop software that you could. I think at the time it had ASX feeds, and that was it. Yep. Everything else was manual import. So you had to download your CSVs from your bank accounts, then you had to put them in the right place, and you had to reconcile everything, and it was a nightmare. Yeah. And it's come such a long way. It has. And even going back to the business accounting side of things. Before, even back when in the QuickBooks days, before they went to QuickBooks Online and before Xero, you had to have your bookkeeper come in and download your data files, and then take them off, or either stay on site and do their work, or take it off site and do all the work, come back with the reports. And it was such a bulky and long process with very little value. It was, and I really think that the age of cloud technology has really kind of commoditized the heavy lifting and allowed more time for the professional to be an advisor. And at the end of the day, this is what these people need, right?
Totally. Look, I have to laugh because I was actually thinking of this the other day that, we're now in 2018 and it was 20 years ago. God, in 1998, I was an account manager at Microsoft and I was dealing with the two big banks down in Melbourne. And I was in there with our product manager presenting Microsoft Money as a platform for a bank to use to engage their clients. And same thing, you had this, was it QIF the file? QAF was the upload kind of, standard to take transactional data and it was so manual. And you're right, like today, the thing I love about cloud is, and this goes to both small business but also now in the consumer, household, individual sense, through bank feeds and through open APIs, we can get a lot of that data. So the great thing about our platform is I can put my house, I can put investment property, vehicle, bank accounts, anything that can be wired up, superannuation, portfolios, investments, so forth. And we'll take that data feed and we'll update it in real time. So every time I get onto my phone, I know what my net worth is. I can actually set up rules through bank feeds. So at any stage, I know what I'm spending. I can set budgets, and of course, we've got tax tagging, so I know what my deductible expenses are at any time through the year. I mean, it's very powerful. It is, It's all automated. And that's the powerful thing about it. I know where I'm at any stage throughout the year, and I'm on the road, so I've got great ways to be able to consume that through a mobile interface. So, look, it's come so far in 20 years. It's crazy. You'd expect it 20 years is a long time, right? So,
it's interesting to see where it's going to go as well. I think if we were having this conversation in 20 years more time, just think what's going to happen, of how all these things are going to be interlinked.
Yeah.
And I guess how powerful the insights are going to be then. So it's exciting to see.
I think you'll take it all for granted in 20 years' time. I think, these sort of technologies that MyProsperity is putting together is just going to take over, and they're not even going to think back to, when you didn't have it. Do you know what I mean? Back in my day, we had to use a pen and paper. Like, you're going to, everyone will be linked up like this.
But I would say, and I think you guys are going to be pleased to hear me say this, but you look 20 years, and I think there's a lot of technology, and this is one of the things that I discovered when I got involved in the personal wealth space, or whole of wealth, and that is there is a lot of technology coming to the fore, which is a direct play. There's a lot of talk about robo-advice and do-it-yourself type platforms and so forth, and we'll see a lot of that come to the fore. It's interesting. So last 12 months, it was $15.2 billion of investment that came into the FinTech space. So this is a really lively and rich environment to play in. But we're firmly of the belief that regardless of the technology, advisors are not going to go away. So MyProsperity is a platform that you only get access to through an advisor, because we fundamentally believe let's take away a little bit like Xero, where we said, if it can be automated, it will be. So bank feeds, data entry. If you go back, 5-10 years ago, there was a lot of data entry, and bookkeepers were making a lot of money out of data entry. And we said, you know what, that's probably going to go away, because if we can automate it through bank feeds and a whole lot of other good technology, we don't want you to be doing that work, right? So, and bookkeepers have had to sort of reinvent themselves more as business coaches and doing a lot of work, which is quite frankly more interesting. So that's been a big impact. We see the same for advisors. We know that paraplanners and those sorts of roles are all about gathering data, and there's a lot of manual work involved. And just we had one advisor just in Sydney here, and he told me before MyProsperity, we were spending 4 to 5 hours before a client meeting, particularly sophisticated ones, just gathering all that data. I mean, you don't want to be doing that. It's not why you got into advice. You want to be providing the advice. You want to be really understanding your client and adding value. So let the technology do the heavy lifting, and the advisor can get on with doing what they do best, which is understanding the options that the client, what are their goals and how do we get them to achieve those goals. So
I think that's been a lot of the issue around the low uptake of advice. I think that for far too long, I think for a couple of reasons, the industry hasn't had the tools to evolve before. It was very much reliant on that product play that you mentioned before, of doing the super rollovers, managing money, setting up managed funds, buying equities, all these types of things. But also, I guess, the amount of transparency that advisors had to be able to add value was back on that manual work. It's how much work I have to do to be able to advise my clients on these things. I remember back in the day, like if we took on a cash flow client, they had to be quite affluent in order to afford the service. We were doing monthly spreadsheets, and we're doing Excel reporting and trending and all of this manual analysis, that our cost to serve was just so high. So the amount of clients that we had in our market that could see value in the service and could afford to pay for it was very, very small. So now it's really opened the world with technology, that it's really opened the market for more clients to be able to access good quality advice and get value from these types of services.
You need these services, you need this technology, because it levels the playing field. For as far back as you look, money has become more and more complex, and financial matters have become more and more complex, and things like MyProsperity and this sort of technology is unwinding that complexity to make it simpler and easier for people, more attainable. It's essentially combating the difficultness.
Look, I think, and you hit on a really good point, and I was in the same boat as I think I mentioned earlier, I was a customer. While I was running Xero, my advisor signed me up to MyProsperity, we had been promoting Cashbook as a means of doing all the cash flow analysis, but there was all the other stuff that existed. So there was 2 things that I displaced when I moved to MyProsperity. The first was I had this password protected document, which was I called it Life on a Page, and it was actually more than a page. But it had everything that I owned, and like all my passwords, everything that possibly needed to be accessed. It was quite obviously sensitive information. And that was like, if I get hit by a bus, there it is, and I give my wife and my brother, who's executive from my will, access to that. So if anything happened, you can access that. But it was static, right? And the other thing, which is really our biggest competitor, is Excel. And the problem with that is that you'll set a budget, probably early in the new year. You'd sit down on a day like today when it's raining, sit down, you do your budgeting, and you spend hours on Excel. You go, I'm in control. And then a month later, it's all out of date. And this is the thing. So, you spend a couple of hours setting up MyProsperity, and every time you log in, it's all there and it's all up to date. And, so that's a big shift, because you're right. A lot of people just get bogged down in the admin. And as I said, we displace Excel. We're a cloud-based version of Excel that's wired up real time and does so much more, because then I can store all my source documents, my policy documents, my will, everything in one place. And
how many times have you gone, where's that document that I need to be taxed on?
Totally.
Yeah. The thing I really like about the tech industry, and I think it's very congruent with our beliefs in our business, is, I guess, that user experience, which coincides very well with the behavioural aspects of finance. Really, of anything, it's guess what's the driving force, and I guess it's about understanding, do people move towards pleasure or do they move away from pain? And I think that there's a lot of negative connotations and stigma around budgeting, the dirty B word. I spoke about it at length in my book. That people feel that, really, budgeting is that exercise. It's sitting down on that rainy day, punching out the spreadsheet, trying to cut costs, eat beans on toast for dinner, in pursuit of trying to achieve these goals. And I think that the technology space is really trying to redefine how budgeting is done. I guess our definition of budgeting is really about defining the means in which you have available to live the life that you want, or craft the life that you want. And I guess a common phrase we use is living for today and planning for tomorrow. So, mate, I guess from your experience, and I guess it would have been relevant back at Xero as well, the connotations around doing bookkeeping or managing your accounting in-house is so daunting. So with, I guess, this journey that you've been on through managing director at Xero and now the CEO of MyProsperity, how have you found the journey, or how have you found the changes in that kind of overcoming those negative connotations as continue to evolve to try and reinforce that budgeting is actually a good thing?
Well, look, if I go back to the Xero experience, the big problem that we were solving there was cash flow. Because all businesses, their lifeblood is cash flow. And what we were able to promise and deliver was the fact that if you are using cloud accounting software, if you're using Xero, you can reconcile your bank account, and all those bank feeds were in there, and you knew what money was coming in and going out. You can do your reconciliation in the morning at 9:15. You have a real-time view of your cash flow. Now, that was unheard of in small business. Most businesses don't really understand their cash flow position until the end of the month, and it's always sort of a historical sort of view of what has happened, as opposed to some of the forward planning, which being in the cloud allows you to be able to be much more proactive. Now, that same proposition lends itself to the individual household. With bank feeds, you are in control. Like you say, real time what you're spending money on. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm the world's best budgeter, right? So, and this is one of the difficulties. It's like, you hit on it. Technology can do so much, but at the end of the day, it's human behaviour, and you need to change that behaviour. There needs to be a commitment to say, if I'm going to save 10% of what I earn and put that away to invest, or I'm going to, hive off a certain amount for pleasure, and I'm going to be super disciplined, I'm not going to spend anything more than that, then that requires, a change in behaviour. But the tools are there to be able to manage that. I'll give you a simple example. So, and this was sort of the moment where I went, oh my God, so I've been using MyProsperity for a couple of years, and I don't meticulously use the budget, but I know how much money I was spending on. And the really interesting one was, we've got 3 kids, and the viewers are probably going to think I'm a bad father here, but
no judgment.
They all play sport, and the boys are getting a bit older, so they're going to parties on a Saturday night. You've got so many priorities. So I could not live without Uber. Could not live without it. And so I set up a specific spending category around Uber. I spent nearly $3,000 on Uber. In the last 12, and actually the previous financial year, it's $3,000. That's a lot of money, But I know that,
Sure.
There's times where I won't go to my bank. I'll go into MyProsperity. So another good example is where I was overseas and I noticed this thing come up on my credit card going, PlayStation. So it's $80. That's interesting. So I can go to MyProsperity and I'll do a search on PlayStation to look at all of the PlayStation transactions over the last year. spent $500. I realised I think my credit card is in PlayStation and the kids are upgrading games. So you probably come across that a lot where people sometimes don't know where money's going. So this is about visibility and then having the control over that.
I think more often than not, mate. I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think for every 10 people that know where their money's going, there's 100 that don't. Exactly. So that's why this sort of stuff's so important.
So important, and most internet banking is good to transact stuff, but it's not really good in actually understand. So I can go back and I can set those spending categories, and I know what I'm spending money on, and we can look at it, and then we may not get finite down to the dollar on what we're going to do, but it's a conversation starter, which is like, we spent so much money on entertainment last year, or geez, look at Airbnb, but we've got to stop. So I'm staying in Airbnb at the moment here in Sydney, but it's having that visibility and then being able to use that information to make a change. That's right. And I think that's the power.
Yeah, it's making informed and educated decisions. I think that people are very hard on themselves when it comes to budgeting. I think a lot of people set unsustainable goals when it comes to their cash flow. Yeah. Like I've had clients say that they're going to only spend $50 a week on their personal spending. Okay, let's talk about that. Do you buy coffees in the morning? Yes. Okay, do you buy lunch or do you take lunch to work? Oh, I buy lunch. Okay, well, $50 is more than gone.
You've blown your budget by 300% already.
Exactly, and they're setting themselves up to fail, which obviously reinforces those negative beliefs around budgeting.
Yeah.
And they view it in a bad way. Yeah. And I think the whole idea of this software is about having transparency. And we try and take our clients through an exercise, and I talk about in my book as well, that it's about doing the Excel spreadsheet first, so that's what you think you spend, and then setting up a system like MyProsperity, which actually gives you the real, no BS numbers.
It's the truth serum.
Exactly.
That's how I describe it. It's the truth serum. Yep.
Yeah, and Sam's right that 9 out of 10 times people have no idea what they're spending.
Yeah.
And it comes down to structure too. Like we spoke about this on a podcast the other day, that it's just too easy to spend money these days. You tap and go, and with all these I guess
subscriptions, all these internet subscriptions.
Before you know it, all the money's gone. If you haven't set up the right structures, then you're setting yourself up to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, and I'll use myself as an example, right? When I started actually managing my cash flow property with technology like this, the enlightenment you get from it. So I used to try save as much money as I can because I really had no idea how much money I needed to save, and always felt a little bit guilty about spending money. And then once you actually work backwards from, you need to save this amount every month to get to, X goal, I feel less guilty about spending money after doing my budget than I felt before, because it was like, well, I'm still saving X amount. I can afford to spend Y amount on coffees or going out for lunches or things like that. So it works on the flip side as well. It's not just about doing your budget and going, I can't, buy a new pair of shoes until next year. Or do you know what I mean? I think it works both ways.
Yeah, and I think it's getting the balance right. Yeah, to me, getting the budgeting is kind of like that. One of those sort of foundation things that you really, if you haven't done that, then the longer term aspects of wealth creation become more difficult. So getting those foundational things is part of it, mapping your net worth, because most people don't know how much they're worth. No. And a lot of people probably undervalue themselves. When they actually map it all out, they go, no, actually, that's not bad. And then it's obviously, the wealth creation is so, I often find partners that I speak to that are on MyProsperity, they go, there's almost like this psychological barrier with clients that because they feel out of control, they're less inclined to really set goals or make proactive steps to where they want to be long term. So getting your budgeting sorted and getting everything into one place, you sort of sit back and go, now I'm ready to talk about what's next. Now I feel, because I know where everything is and I know what's happening day to day, I'm more inclined now to be able to sit down and go, okay, how do we plan for the future?
That's right.
How do we start to set some goals, put in place some strategies to start to create wealth? Because you've got to have that balance. You've got to have here and now, what am I doing versus where do I want to be in 10 years? Exactly. And I think having that control, that peace of mind, actually psychologically helps you take that step to go, I'm going to start, planning for that now.
Yeah, because I guess you can only allocate the means that you have available to future planning. It's just like we've had clients that have really tried to overcommit to their wealth creation, and they haven't had the surplus in their budget to support it. And it's ultimately setting themselves up for failure or creating a whole lot of risk. For example, going out and buying an investment property where if you don't have a tenant for a couple of weeks, you're going to go broke.
Yeah.
And it's trying to avoid these situations. I think it's the way that we like to approach it is that you take the least amount of risk in order to get to the outcome that you want. Well, how do you define a risk? Well, you need to know what the outcome is first. So I think that what I've really liked about utilising the tool is that it gives us that level of transparency around what means we actually have available in order to continue to build and grow with certainty without overextending ourselves, which is a fantastic thing for our clients.
Yeah. Yeah, there's it's such an important area. Who knows what 2018's got in store? We know that there's obviously property market is starting to cool.
Yeah,
there's a lot of concern about people carrying a lot of debt, mortgage stress. At the same time, there's people talking that the stock market, things are looking good. We've got a lot of uncertainty globally, in terms of the sort of global environment. And it was interesting, we've still got. There's a lot of really interesting, when you look at in the macroeconomic sense, there's a lot of concerns out there in terms of financial sort of, household finances. You've got, like we said, there's only 14% of people actually getting advice. There's something like 4.2 million Australians that don't have a will. There's, something like $2.4 trillion of wealth that's actually going to flow down to the next generation. So they need advice in terms of what to do with that. And it was even interesting, we were talking before about the fact that, Scott Pape's book last week they talked about, that was the number one selling book in Australia, sold almost 500,000 copies. So people are concerned about this stuff. They need help. And there's a lot of, concerns about, financial stress.
And on that point, Chris, I think that I try and play devil's advocate with a lot of these things. And when I hear that number 500,000, given the population in a developed country, I say, why didn't he sell more? Why wasn't there 2 million, 3 million copies sold?
Yeah.
And I really feel that although there's an appetite and it's an increasing appetite, it's not increasing fast enough to solve these problems that you've already mentioned that are going to be coming up over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah. Well, the help's here. The help's here. The technology's here. The advice is here. There's enough education out there for people to actually take control of their finances. I don't know. We just need to reach more people, and get them. I think too many people think it's too hard, so they just put it in there too hard. But when it's not, do you know what I mean? You can take advice, you get the technology, you couple it, and you can actually get ahead.
Yeah.
You're on the coalface, mate. I think that you speak to more advisors and you're really getting it from the horse's mouth. What do you think is the limiting factor, obviously outside what we've already spoken about, that's stopping the remaining 85% of opting for advice and seeking advice?
Look, I think some of the items we've already covered, that it is about changing human behaviour. I think a lot of people, if you think about the administration required to sort of get everything in one place, I don't think people know enough about the options that exist. Clearly the advice industry's been through a bit of a tough time with, future financial advice, so FOFA, and a real sort of crackdown on trail commissions, and all of these things has not helped the advice industry as a whole in terms of its perception in the market. People feel, I'm just trying to follow your product. So I think, this is one of the things that we're really passionate about, is really making sure that the advice industry, through technology, can present great alternatives to people. That it's not just about, sitting down, you've got to spare 20 grand, we can invest that. It's like, hey, you know what? The first step is, let's just get your financial world sorted. Let's get everything in control so that you feel that peace of mind. You know where stuff is. Then start to plan for other things. So, and that's the thing that we, if you think about the basics around financial advice, there's two things that you really need. Firstly, you need to know what your clients have, what they own and owe. And that's something we solve. And with that data, there's ways that we can, as you know, through our surveys and things, when you're doing document signing, we can collect how clients are feeling about, I'm concerned about, my savings goals, debt reduction, do I think I'm going to have enough to retire, etc. So we can gather that. So if you know what they own and owe, and you know how they're feeling and where they want to be, the advice bit becomes a lot easier. So technology can play a really key role, and that's what we're focused on. We've got nearly 500 advisors now on our platform that are out there, over 20,000 subscribers. So in the whole scheme of, however many 9.5 million adults out there that all need financial advice. It's very small, it's early days, but we're optimistic. We think that through technology and really we can help the advice industry and actually get more people making better decisions about their finances.
Yeah, I think it's really important.
I think we can go more mainstream, mate. Australia is one of the least advised countries in the entire world, in the developed world. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of room for more people to take advice.
Yeah, and I was quoting numbers, some of the numbers I've quoted before, but the really interesting one is that, if you go back to 2012, one of the surveys, there's a lot of surveys out there that's been produced by, some of the big four, banks and so on and so forth, but there was one survey in particular that I took note of, which said that in 2012, 85% of Australians were concerned about their financial well-being, 85%. 4 years on, in 2016, that number was 95%. Wow. So it's up. So that's a lot of Australians concerned about their financial well-being. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's a real need, and what we've got to do is figure out, our belief is that technology can help solve it. It won't solve everything because, like you say, the big thing is human behaviour.
Yeah, it's
people need to make that decision to say, I am going, like we're going through that right now. It's early January. And a lot of people woke up on the 1st of January and just went, right, this is the year. This is the year I'm going to change and I'm going to get wealthy. But yeah, look, I think people need to understand that there are, that technology can help there. But again, I come back to the point that, people doing well in terms of their personal household, are going to have good advisors. Good advisors are critical to that. And that's something that we firmly believe in. So it's a combination of that technology with good advice, we think delivers great outcomes.
We spoke about this before, that in other industries, whether it be if you're a business owner, you invest in a business coach or a business advisor to help you get to optimize your situation to get to your goals. If you're a high-performance athlete, you get a coach.
Yep.
But I think that it's often overlooked that individuals don't put enough value on their potential to go seek that advice to, buffer away from their weaknesses and work towards their strengths. Yeah. And I think that's something that definitely needs to change. So.
And look, I know you guys do this, and what I'm seeing more you talk about, I have spoken to a lot of advisors, and the way you guys approach it, and this is becoming more common, is that, you might have a millennial that's just got a job and they need some basic financial advice. Often they're focused on debt reduction, so they need help around budgeting. They need some element of risk mitigation, so maybe some life insurance at some stage through their journey. Obviously, if they're working, they've got superannuation, so they need to think about how do I maximise that in terms of its yield. And there's right up to the more sophisticated. But, a lot of advisors now are recognising that at the low end, you're going to have a different service offering than your high net worths and, even right up to family office type scenarios where it's, it's a high fee. So I think a lot of people, again, if you go back to the surveys, they say people fear financial advice because, they think they can't afford it. They're uncertain about what the outcomes are going to be. And I think, more and more, I think the advisors of the future are going to use technology to, again, take the cost out of what should be the heavy lifting that technology can deliver and provide services that are affordable with a view that that millennial one day is going to become a high net worth and ultimately you want them to get to, like a family office type situation where they've got, extensive wealth and take them on that journey and have a fee structure that matches those needs. I think a lot of people don't understand that. They think, they don't understand what options are out there just to get basic financial advice, which really can put them, years ahead in terms of where they would otherwise be.
What do you guys think needs to be done in order to get more people to take an active role in their financial well-being?
No, I think people don't know what they don't know. People are so busy. Like the two words that I heard most last year was stressed and tired, and that's a lag indicator for people just working so hard. People are trying to have a career, run their business, have a family life, spend time with their family, have some time to enjoy, to go away and kind of unwind. So I think that their priorities in terms of managing their finances and managing their wealth journey is put on the back burner in a lot of cases. And they probably feel that it's too hard. And it's because they don't understand that it doesn't have to be hard. Like our three go-to statements is simple, scalable, sustainable. And if we hit those three things, then we can really uncomplicate back to the previous point. Use technology, get everything in one hub. So you've got one source of truth, so then you can spend more time doing what you love and what you enjoy.
And look, we're obviously a believer in that, and I know from my own experience. And when I got on MyProsperity, like I said, it was the first time where I felt in control, because everyone goes through those stressful moments where through the year you just go, I really don't know where everything is. Simple things like, the amount of times, I had this conversation the other week about, we're having a couple of beers and there's a group of us talking about the times in your lives where you've overlooked something like an insurance renewal or something. There was one guy who said, I was driving around for a month in an unregistered car because we moved addresses and I just didn't know where everything was. And it's like, and you think about, that's bad. But we've all sort of been there where you just, something has slipped through the cracks, you just don't, and it causes stress. And then you have that sort of realization, you go, God, I feel so out of control. So look, technology can solve that. And that's what we're aiming to solve. And then really setting things up where, basic advice on the back of the technology can really help people get ahead. So you're right, it's about education. We're trying to get the word out there that, we'll get there.
We'll get there. It's all happening. So, mate, a lot of our audience is small business owners. A lot of them are owners and leaders in their business. And obviously, you've been in a number of leadership roles and scaled teams pretty aggressively. So, mate, let's talk about your kind of leadership journey. What got you into management roles and into leadership roles? What kind of drew you to working in those positions?
Look, I think from the early days, when I'm thinking, probably I took my first management role when I was at Microsoft back in the 90s when I was about 30, and I really enjoy. I learned early on that I really enjoyed leading people, and the teams that I ran, building good cultures where it was fun to come to work and people worked hard and you celebrated success, and that sort of just led on from there. I hadn't anticipated, like, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, in 2010 you leave Microsoft and build a business where you're managing 270 people, I probably would have run to the nearest rock crest. That was just crazy. And I think part of that was really just surrounding myself with, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I did build a fantastic leadership team there at Xero, and that just made things a lot easier. But we had fun. It was a culture. It was a hyper-growth business. And when you're in a hyper-growth business, things are fun. The culture it becomes self-fulfilling, and that was a lot of fun. And likewise at MyProsperity, we're a good-sized team now. We have over 30 staff, and we feel like we're building something really special that, people are coming into work passionate about what we're doing. In all cases, when I look at Microsoft Xero and MyProsperity, there's great purpose about what you're doing. And I think, even though people are probably listening to this going, never run a business of 270 staff, I think that the one thing that's consistent across any business that's successful is having a really good purpose, understanding why you're doing it, and being passionate about that, being really believing, and that's something that I always felt was important. If I didn't believe in something, it was really hard to get out of bed in the morning. The sort of hours that people put in. I don't care if you're running, a business of 300 staff or you're running a two-person small business. You've got to have that fire in the belly that you're doing something that's purposeful. That's half the battle. The rest kind of comes because you sort of, that sort of feeds off itself. So I think that was always something that I had to get involved in, something that I really was passionate about.
When you were on that steep growth curve, what were some of the core skills that you needed to learn and you needed to learn really quickly to adapt to that leadership role?
Look, I think it's knowing what you're good at and what you're not. And I think we're always learning. Even now, I look at things about, learning to let go of things. You kind of, so for me, it was making sure that as we grew quickly, that I was bringing in the skills that were needed. Things like, we got to 50 staff and we didn't have a HR person, and there's always exposure there when you've got a lot of people and you have a responsibility. Equally, operationally, I was doing a lot of stuff, and I ended up bringing in an operations person to manage the day-to-day, which was, for me, at that point, 2 years into Xero, I'm talking about specifically, was quite stressful because there was a lot to do, and I was trying to do too much. And I think that's one of the things that, as you scale a business, hyper-growth, and again, a lot of people look at this going, well, I don't have plans to sort of scale to that size, but, in answer to your question, it was really understanding at the right points when to bring in that skill set, because it does become overwhelming as someone who's running a business like that. when you're trying to do everything, you know. And it was hard for staff as well. I mean, when I started, I had 6 people. I remember I had one girl, Sally, who used to do so much. And then when I look back 4 years, I was having a chat with her going, you know, we've got 30 people now doing what you used to do because the things have scaled that so big. So you've got to, the mindset you as a CEO, but also your staff have to have is constant change. You've got to get in that hyper-growth kind of mindset, which is things are going to change. They're going to change quick. You know, my job in 3 months may change. You know, there's going to be more people coming into the business, and I'm kind of going to, you know, get more specialised. And that was one of the things. Some people don't like to do that. No. So they don't like, you know, I'm doing all these things and I'm feeling really important, but you know what? I need 10 people to do what you're doing now. It's like, you know, so that whole change management aspect in hypergrowth becomes really critical.
It's interesting, and it's something that one of my mentors always taught me, that a business will never outgrow its leader. And having that ability to understand the purpose and be congruent to the purpose and be willing to shift and change and grow with the business is ultimately going to determine its success. And I think one of the biggest things, and you touched on it a couple of times, that taking on too much and having ownership of too many things ultimately puts you as the bottleneck. And a lot of small business owners have this issue. They transition from being a really good technician. They've got into business because they love what they do, or they're passionate about it, or they've seen a gap. And then that transition from technician to manager, or from manager to leader, is very, very difficult because they've got to let go of the reins and they've got to hand that on to someone else. Yeah. So what do you think is the key to going through that evolution as a leader in a business, of jumping through those various stages and reinventing yourself?
Look, I think it's recognising those points in the business. Like, we're going through that now at MyProsperity. We are confident we're going to become a hyper-growth company. You know, we've in the last 12 months we've more than doubled the team. And it feels exciting, but equally, you know, the point I was making before, we've got great talent across the team. It's knowing when to bring in the people, because you've also got to keep an eye on the bottom line too. Because we don't have endless amounts of money like most businesses. We just, you know, we've got funding, but we can't just go and hire 10 people tomorrow. So you've got to manage that, and you've also got to get more out of your people. You know, ask them to stretch, you know, step them up into roles, and you know, right now, I'm looking at how do we create the right sort of leadership framework in the business, because I can't do everything. Sure. And so, but that's a great opportunity for people to stretch and step up. And so we're going through that now, because we're signing up 30 to 40 new partners a month. Things are rapidly growing, and so we have to really keep an eye on, are we bringing the right skill sets in? Yeah. And for me, it's been able to work on the business more, not in it, because you like anyone, you have the tendencies, like stuff's going on, you sort of jump in. I still do demos, which I love doing, but, because we don't have all the resources, because we've got a lot of demand coming through. It's like, Chris, can you do this demo? Yeah, sure, I'd love to, and you realise, holy crap, makes you, I'm a salesperson. But that's fun, that's part of it. But, it's rolling up the sleeves when you have to, but understanding that you've got to work on the business so that you're understanding that scalability, making sure that, you're able to grow, and it's fun. It's hard work, but it's good fun.
Such a fine balancing act, working on the business, working in the business. You can't do too much of either. The other one will fall off.
But it all feeds itself. And the thing I really admire about the whole business and what you've been able to create is that through this steep growth curve, I've seen with so many other businesses them drop the ball. And they end up burning those loyal customers that have been with them throughout that entire journey, just because they've tried to, pursue growth above all else. And the thing that's been fantastic about your growth trajectory has been that the service delivery, even down to the smallest things of account management and support, hasn't changed, hasn't faltered. It's always been the same. And it's been fantastic.
It's good that you feel that. Yeah. Because there's times where we think, things are becoming really overwhelming. For example, right now we're just about to bring another person in support. And that's really important because, one of the things we talk about a lot at MyProsperity is that our product is the overall experience. It's one thing to have a good piece of tech, but you've got to be able to deliver that. Like you mentioned, we've got some great people in the business that are really passionate about helping our partners. And that's one of the other things that you really got to make sure you don't lose sight of, is constantly listening and responding, because your partners, your customers, they're going to be the ones that ultimately dictate your success. So you better listen to them, because we're still, we've been going now since 2011, and so we're going, 7 years almost. And we're still evolving, and still, this is that notion of constant improvement. But your partners, and sometimes, they're pretty passionate if you don't get things right. You've got to listen to them and respond. And so that's part of it, and I think that's something that we really do take to heart and take it very seriously.
Yeah, and it's important that, look, there's always going to be frustrations with tech, let's face it. And that support is really what, it's not about, one of my staff always said to me, he says, well, what's better, to avoid the problem altogether or have a problem but be able to provide a valuable solution to your customer and guide them through that process to provide them that solution? And I thought about it, I go, well, let's avoid the problem altogether, of course. But sometimes you can actually build a much better relationship by being the answer to their frustration. And I think that customer experience, although there's sometimes some road bumps, being able to guide them through the journey and get them to the outcome at the end of the day is sometimes more valuable.
I've seen it firsthand, mate. I've seen it firsthand where something just goes horribly wrong, whether it's your fault or it's totally outside of your control. And you can either make a mess of it even further, or you can do such a good job of fixing whatever problems come up that the customer or the client's just like, well, they're even more impressed with you that the problem came up and the way you handled the problem. Yeah. I think that translates across all businesses.
I agree. Yeah. And mate, one of the common themes for a lot of our clients who are small business owners, and even for us too, is finding the right people. What do you think is the key to getting the right people as part of your team? Because obviously people can make or break a business.
Yeah. Look, I think, attracting talent, finding the right talent for your business is always an ongoing challenge. It always has been, regardless of whether you've got a really strong brand out there or whether you're building a brand. I think, look, the one thing I always look for and particularly having what I've learned from Microsoft and Xero, now when I think about things from MyProsperity, is people that are so critical. So one of the things I did at Xero, one of the things I'm doing at MyProsperity is I get involved in every interview, and you're always looking for that cultural fit. I mean, we're an incredibly diverse organisation, probably the most diverse group of people I've ever worked with. And that creates, I think, a really healthy environment where people respect their differences, but come to the table with different ideas and different approaches and different perspectives. And through that, you get really good outcomes. And so I'm always, fostering that diversity, but bringing together like-minded people that are particularly around the values and what drives them. Because again, I come back to our purpose. Our purpose is, it's exciting. We're helping the advice industry help their clients create better lives in terms of their financial well-being. And so, I know that my guys get out of bed every morning thinking about that is something really worth working for. And on the back of that, we want to create a valuable organisation. We want to create a household brand that we can be proud of. And look back at a few years ago, look what we built. A tech company out of Australia that has global reach with great purpose and is really, kicking some goals. So that almost becomes a beacon for people to come and, when we have people come and apply for jobs at MyProsperity, even though our brand's building, like people are now talking about us out in the market, which is great because, I want to create an employer brand. I want people to want to come and work, that we have an image and a profile that people say, I want to be associated with that brand. Yeah. So that's really important to me because, you spend a lot of your time building a business and, just about every waking hour thinking about it and potentially working in it. You want to get to the end of the journey and just go, we've created a legacy and we've actually helped improve people's lives, not just the employees, but the customers and partners that we serve. So that's really important to me. And I think what that does is again, it attracts people with that same sort of mindset that, I want to be part of that.
And that's powerful.
It's really important. I think that far too often when people go, and look, I've been guilty of it myself, you get a resume from somebody that you want to fulfill a certain role in your team, and on paper they look fantastic. But compromising on that cultural fit and that values fit is the biggest mistake that you can ever make.
Absolutely.
And I was always told by one of my previous mentors that you hire on values and you teach everything else. You're better off having someone who's fresh, excited, passionate, that you can teach all of the skills that they're lacking, than somebody who's a bit old and crusty, had a lot of experience but just jaded and doesn't really want to be there, doesn't believe in the ultimate vision. Yeah. And it's sometimes hard to find that balance.
you've got to be fussy. You know, you might get lucky. You know, we've I shouldn't mention names, but we just well, we just we've just hired an amazing individual in our market, you know, to run marketing, girl Alice, and you know, I was looking around and it's you have these roles where you just go, you know what you want, and you know, you talk to a lot of people, and you do get impatient. You just, you know, you kind of like, we just need someone to do this because I was running marketing. Now, I used to run marketing many years ago. I'm certainly not the best at it, but I was doing that, and you know, and plus all the other things and struggling. So there is that kind of like, you know, I've got to get someone to do this. But you've just got to stick to your guns, and it's funny, you know, and you sort of know when that person walks through the door, you go, oh, and you're almost desperate. It's like, please take a job, you know, because they're so perfect, and you know, she's been amazing. So, but we've got a number of people like that, and you know, hopefully that will continue. No matter how big we get, you've got to be always looking for the best possible person to come into that business. And they may not be, you know, because you see organisations that hire just the A types, you know, you've got to have a lot of, you know, soldiers that are in there, roll the sleeves up and do the hard work that may not necessarily be, you know, on that trajectory to one day I want to be the CEO. You know, if you have everybody on the organisation that wants to be the CEO, it can be a pretty, you know, interesting place on a number of levels.
The Shark Tank.
But we've got some great people that just come in and they're just like, you know, this is my job, but you know what? I just love doing it and doing it really well, and I'm passionate about it. So you've got to have all different types. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, it is very important. That personality clash. You don't want too many of those D-type personalities in a room that can get messy, right?
Nothing will get done. Everyone will just boss each other around and work will get done.
Totally, yeah. So that's all good fun.
So, Matt, I guess you've got a plethora of experience and you've had an amazing journey. So if you had to give one piece of advice to our listeners and people who are watching to kind of guide them, whether it be on their entrepreneurial journey or whether it be in their wealth journey, what would you tell them?
Look, I think let fun be your guide. Like when I left Microsoft, I'd stopped having fun. Like it was an amazing place. I don't mean anything against Microsoft. Working at Microsoft 15 years was like doing 3 MBAs.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of stuff they threw at me and the trust that they put in their staff to stretch and do things that I had never thought I was able to do and have the opportunity to do was incredible. But in that corporate sense, I got burnt out. I was jaded. I actually walked in one day. I made a decision. You know, I won't go through the whole story, but I remember there was this absolute light bulb moment where I thought, I'm really unhappy. And I need to do something else. And 3 weeks later, I walked in and resigned. I'm like, oh my God, you know. And I had a really good career, and I had a senior role. I was a director there, and no one understood it. But I just went, you know what? I've got to get happy, and I just don't want to do this. And that's when, and I had this kind of belief I wanted to do something smaller. And then the Xero thing, and I was happy at Xero, but that was like the thing that was the burning desire in me 5 years at Xero was, I'm looking at all this great tech now. Like Xero at the time when it came to the fore was one of the sort of it came out of New Zealand. I shouldn't claim it as an Australian when I sound like Russell Crowe, crowded house. But you know, in that sense, it became a really a big successful organisation. And then tech in Australia started going nuts. And I'm looking around seeing all this great stuff, and I think, you know, I want to be part of that again. I want to get into that sort of early stage company. And then there's, you know, and through that journey, and it's not like some of these gigs are hard, and there's times where you just got to remind yourself, you know, why you're doing it, and that, you know, this ultimately there's this real good that comes from that. And I think just if you're not happy, this is hard, but you know, if you're not happy, go and change things. Go and try and do something and put yourself out there. I always have this test, you know, when I left Microsoft, it was like I went, you know, I've got a couple of mortgages, and I've got debt, and you know. And I'm going to leave a well-paid job. And I took a 50% pay cut. But I'm like, I'm either going to die in the corporate world unhappy or I'm going to have a crack. And I used what's the worst thing that can happen? And the worst thing was actually, I'll sell the house, we can move down the peninsula, I'll get an average job, we have money left over, and it's actually a really good life. That's the worst thing. Best thing was like, I get involved in a tech startup and take it successfully to an IPO and do really well out of it. And so fortunately for me, that happened. But anything in between was good enough. But it was either miserable in corporate, I just needed to get out. But I just chose to have a crack. And I think people, you do get sort of stuck where you're unhappy. It's like, I can't change because I've got all these commitments. But look at what is the worst thing that can happen. And often when you look at it, that's actually worth having a crack. Because if it doesn't work out, well, at least I know I've tried.
Exactly right.
And I'm not going to die wondering. But if you don't have a crack, you don't want to look back in 5-10 years ago, geez, I should have left that job, mate. Just, look what I could have, I could have done this or I could have been that. That's, so, I don't know, that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer. But let fun be your guide, but also, I think, look at the worst case scenario, and that should be the prompt to drive action, to actually, if you're not happy, take the test. And 9 times out of 10, it's actually not a bad scenario. And you'll feel better about yourself for having a crack.
It's really inspiring, mate. I think that people make excuses for themselves. And there's always that little voice in their head that tells them, don't do this, play it safe, just keep doing what you're doing. Especially when you've got a lot of responsibilities, you've got a young family.
Mortgage. I had all that, and it was like, you do feel like you're putting it on the line. But, again, you owe it to yourself. You only get one shot at it,
exactly
really.
Right.
You're not on the planet again.
You've got to push yourself out of that comfort zone, right?
Yeah. So it's hard. It's not, I'm not saying, there's sleepless nights involved in doing those things. But if you can make it work, even if, if it's not going to be, you create the next Google, but if you have a crack and you're successful, God, the feeling is like, I did it.
It's phenomenal.
I did it. It's great.
That's fantastic, mate. Look, we really appreciate your insights. I think it's going to be very valuable to people listening and watching. Anybody who wants to get in control of their personal finances that haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to give you some access to MyProsperity. It's a fantastic tool, and I'm sure that taking action in your life is going to lead to profound change. So thank you very much, mate.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks again soon. Cheers. Thanks, mate.